know,
And
I know. You've been so patient. Thank you
oh
so
no,
much.
it's great. There's finally something to talk about, right? There isn't just the everyday conspiracies I've been sharing with you for the last 4 years. Um, so I was at the Capitol on January 6th, kind of as a fluke. I lived in Maryland at the time, and I had just started a graduate program, and all in-person research had come to a halt. So I was looking for some kind of visual anthropology project, and there was nothing going on except the Stop the Steal rally. So I decided to drive down to DC that day to take pictures of the protest, but I arrived quite late, and by the time I got there, it was about 2 o'clock. I guess right around the time the Capitol was being stormed. Um, I had no indication based on what I was experiencing outside, what was actually happening inside. I knew something was wrong, clearly, just based, I was on the east front of the building, which was the opposite side of the tunnels. So back there, I knew something was wrong, as I said, because of the bodies up against the building, which is not allowed. Um, but I didn't really understand what I saw until I got home. And that was how this project started. It quickly turned from like originally looking at gendered pathways of radicalization into trying to figure out who these women were that were in my pictures, because there were so many of them who looked like me. And that shouldn't be surprising to anyone who studies extremism, is white women have always had a role, middle-class white women in particular have always had a role in extremist movements. But what was so interesting was I looked at the first 100 women arrested, looked at the statement of facts that the FBI had filed in their cases, and was looking for any kind of pattern I could find. And although the women only made up, I've heard everything from 13 to 17% of the total people arrested. I think it was maybe closer to 13. Corey would probably know better than me. But I was thinking about this and looking at these patterns, and there were some women with direct affiliations with organized groups, other people that were just kind of there maybe for religious reasons, and I couldn't figure it out until I started looking at these patterns and looking at the ages. And the vast majority of the women, the first 100 women arrested, were my age. They were Gen X or very young boomers. And that was interesting to me because I knew based on my own life experience, there was a lot at stake for being willing to put yourself at risk of being arrested and taken to federal prison. Most of these women have caregiving responsibilities still. And I was very surprised to see how many of them were willing to go inside. More interestingly, so many times we think women are led by men into these situations. And so many of the women I studied had gone there totally on their own without men. And those who did go with men, like one of the women in the book, she left her husband behind and she went in. So I think what I learned from this is women's agency is very important when we're looking at these movements. And I think when women enter movements, they soften things a bit. And so we might not view things as extremism. We might just see it as a woman's sphere, like when we're doing the protection of children's thing. And today's a good day to talk about that with the Epstein files, right? Because I'm not seeing a lot of screaming for that right now on the stuff I study. So that's kind of how I got into this. Did not want to study QAnon, did not want to study conspiracies exactly. But as I started to follow some of these women and just kind of trace like what their belief systems were, I very quickly was led by several of them into what is called conspirituality, which I had to look up. And it was a term coined in 2011 by sociologists to describe the convergence of New Age spiritualism with conspiracism. And so that's kind of how I got into this, is by following different women into these groups. And they all kind of led me down the same path. If that answers your question, I'm sure it did and more.
No, thank you. There are two ladies whom you really are your main subjects, Tammy and Yvonne, of the book. And can you, Noelle, talk about what it was like getting to know them? Because the evolution of the project went from just wanting to maybe research them, study them, write about them, but then there were personal relationships got developed, and I'm really curious about how the relationships with Tammy and Yvonne really evolved as you were working on this book.
That started in year 2. And by year 2, I had enough time to observe at a distance on social media, looking at court records in local hometowns and newspapers. You can learn a lot. People don't use privacy controls. And so it was pretty easy it was reading from a fire hose at first, trying to chart so many people all at once. And so, I kind of narrowed down on that Gen X group because that was the majority. And I think what it was by year two, I was being led down paths I just did not understand. And because so much language is borrowed from so many different groups and it's put into the same pool. One minute you might think you're studying a sovereign citizen, but then wait a minute, they're a flat earther. It was very confusing. And one person, Yvonne, who is neither a flat earther or a sovereign citizen, she was taking me down a path. I was following her journey down this path of conspirituality, and I didn't understand. She got too advanced for me at some point, and so I reached out to her through Messenger and asked some questions, and she gave me her phone number. And so I called her, and we started talking, and we talked for the next couple of years. And the same thing happened with lots of women that I spoke to. They wanted to speak on the phone. And oftentimes we never spoke about politics. It was either me questioning their belief systems that I didn't understand, or we talked about things that we might share in common, like what it was like to be divorced midlife, what it was like to children that were causing trouble as adults, different things that we might be able to relate to each other about. And that was what was strange, because by year two and three, I was realizing, wait a minute, I am finding some common ground. I'm talking to these people, we're sharing information like we're friends. And I will be honest, my very first thought was, my side is going to shun me because I'm getting friendly with quote J6ers, right? But that wasn't the case. I chose these two women. I only settled on these two women because the vast majority of women that I spoke to had motivations that weren't what I was looking for. They had self-serving motivations, either to get their name out there, to become influencers, to sell their products at their stores, or whatever it was. There was nothing to learn from that. That was just, okay, attention economy, influencer culture stuff. But these women were super honest about their lives, they were self-aware. And they were honest with me about their beliefs. We may not share the same reality, but they were honest with me about their belief systems. And so I learned from them. And that seems really weird to say, right? How do you have something in common with, or how do you talk to someone who does not share your reality? And I guess the first thing I probably need to acknowledge is that I'm privileged in that regard, right? I recognize that. I recognize that I am not part of a marginalized group that is targeted by these people and by these groups. And I get that. So I understand that some of this stuff I'm talking about with empathy and curiosity is my next catchphrase there, which is genuine. There is a genuine curiosity about what made people make these choices. I don't know if I would have been as interested in it had I not been there in person, but I was really, truly fascinated about these paths. And that is how this book came through, because I did cross lines that academia would not allow. You are not allowed to get close to your participants. And at some point, when you're hovering above people, it's very easy to slap a label on a group without really looking at the nuance, which I think happens way too often. And when you miss that nuance, you start to miss the motivation for why these beliefs take form in the first place. And I think that was what the real value of doing something like this over time and actually getting to know people and forming relationships with them taught me, was that I could have conversations with some people that could be informative to me and led with curiosity by me. It doesn't mean I have to, I finally came to that realization by year three that it is okay to feel some empathy for certain circumstances. It's okay to see someone as human, even if we don't always share the same reality. I do believe in consequences for actions. I don't think that, there's an excuse for certain things, and everyone has a consequence. So I want to make that really clear, because that does sometimes get lost in what I do, as I believe that I'm able to have empathy without sympathy. And I believe I'm able to understand people and understand why they might be inclined to do something, but also believe that the consequence should be applied. And the relationships are what caused the academic piece to go away, because one of the participants, Tammy, had a child who committed suicide, and her isolation caused her to reach out to me first before anyone else. We'd only been talking for about 6 to 8 weeks online at that point, but I was already the most reliable person in her life. And that speaks volumes to a lot of the people who are willing to talk to me, right? There's a lot of loneliness out there, and there's a lot of free time online, and there's some real bad pathways there.
There sure are.
Yeah.
I was really struck, Noelle, when reading the book, how just open and vulnerable Tammy and Yvonne were with you. And I think that that speaks to and is a testament to just how trustworthy they saw you and entrusting you with information that maybe they wouldn't share so willingly with others whom they did not know for the length of time they knew you. And something that I say in my talks when I give them on behalf of Leaving MAGA's work is, instead of asking what's wrong with someone, we ask what happened to someone. And what really stood out to me, and I'd like to ask you about this, is it seems that Tammy and Yvonne, like so many others we meet who fall prey to conspiracies, whether it's in MAGA or MAGA adjacent, it just seems that so many of them endure and have endured ongoing some kind of trauma in their lives. Was that, you mentioned Tammy's having a child committing suicide. Would you say that their responses and getting caught up in these conspiracies that had at least something to do with trauma that they had experienced in their lives?
I mean, I don't know that either of them would necessarily point to that themselves. I think with the research that's come out that talks about why people are drawn to certain conspiracies, some of the profiles fit, right? Is that the reason? I don't know for sure. I just know what I've observed for 4 years. I know that's a piece of it. I think, I have many of these traits, right? When I was doing this book, I was looking at the different, there's conspiracies as a coping mechanism, right? And it lists all the different, there's different studies that are listing the personality traits most likely to be susceptible to believing in conspiracies. And I fit like the majority of them. And I keep thinking, well, why didn't I go down a rabbit hole? Why didn't I, why haven't I turned the I mean, I'm going to leave that one out today because a lot's changed for me in the last several years. But why didn't I do that? And I don't know why. And I don't know if it is the trauma. And it's not just trauma. Most of the people I spoke to, and again, I was only able to really get to know probably 12 people well enough to make any kind of assessment about my the degree of trauma they had experienced in their lives. If you look at the adverse childhood experiences sheet, right, the ACEs spreadsheet, it talks about all these different boxes you can check. It's much like one of those stress tests where if you check, I moved, I got divorced, I started a new job, and you're just kind of off the charts for stress. That's kind of what this ACE spreadsheet is, as far as, well, I call it a spreadsheet because of my participants, but these adverse childhood experiences are the form, the basis for what many people experience as CPTSD, right? So although I might have my own trauma, I never experienced prolonged, complex trauma over a period of time. I always had some kind of support system in place. There was always some adult in my life that I could trust. So I had those things where I can't say that both of these women in particular had, or many of these people I spoke to had. I see systems that broke down and failed them as well. When you're someone like Tammy and your own children were molested through foster care in the system, and then two of them are caught up in a for-profit juvenile detention center kickback scandal and incarcerated for 2 years as children, essentially, you can understand where a cabal of elite pedophiles hurting children is very plausible. I constantly, every time we're hearing about the Epstein files, I want to tell everybody who believes these things, everybody who joined up because of Save the Children. They were right. They were right. There is a cabal of powerful people who hurt children and they protect each other. But let's take the conspiracies piece out of it. And they're not drinking the blood. They're not harvesting adrenochrome. They're just powerful people who do hideous things and then protect each other regardless of ideology. And I think, I keep waiting for that crack to happen, but I don't see it yet. I still see people needing to cling on to the community that they've formed over the last 6 years, 8 years, whatever it's been now. When you can't, if you disavow a belief, I think the last big split I saw was Ukraine and Russia, as some people couldn't tolerate what most of the groups I was in, who were saying Russia were the good guys. There were some people who did split off because of that. So I keep waiting for this Epstein thing to trigger something like that, because usually, there's so many people who actually had real world damage done to their lives. But it's not as simple as that, because you have to then consider, if I disavow this, if I disbelieve this, I'm not going to be able to participate in these groups that I'm in anymore. And I spend most of my time talking to people on Telegram that I've built relationships with for several years. So it moves past, a belief system into something that becomes your social life as well. And so that's why when you and I met, Rich, I was so interested in what you were doing, because you immediately recognized the need for community. You immediately
That
recognized
was
people
what
had to
I
have
was going to
skin in the
ask you
game.
about, Noelle.
Yeah.
Community. I was going to ask you. Rich asked if I wanted to ask you a question next, and you're
Yep.
going right into it. The sense
Yeah.
of community. Yep.
Yeah, because that was what really first, what I think Rich reached out to me about the research he saw me doing. And one of the first things he said is, I recognized that a community there has to be an off ramp for people to, if they want to explore other ideas, you have to be able to do that. And from my own research, that is true. There are many people on the right who have confided things in me that if their quote friends knew, they might be shunned. They might be, there's a lot of stuff I don't have in this book that I did learn in confidence. And that is where that trust comes in, because I knew what not to include. I didn't, there's a lot of stuff I could have included for salacious reasons, or just, to be shocking, that's not in there, because that would be a violation of trust, and it did nothing to tell the story. So the only thing I used directly from these women was things that could help explain in their own voices, as much as possible, what their beliefs were and why, in some cases. But oftentimes we don't have a real answer for why, because the past is not often described in conspiratorial terms. It's usually just described in terms of dysfunction, dysfunctional parents, broken systems, poverty, whatever it was. It's the regular stuff that we've all experienced, either ourselves or we see happening in the world. So that's the disconnect for me, is why we don't explain everything through conspiracies that happened in the past, but we use everything for now. And that's another reason, is part of that a community. It's not groupthink. It's not that kind of thing, but there is a community factor, a participation factor, and an identity factor that all have to be considered when you change your belief system.
Could you speak a little bit, since we're on the community, because I'm middle aged and I know you are as well, like the lure of belonging, because like all of our lives as women, we're middle aged now, there's certain roles that we have, and our lives are very fulfilled. If you have children, you're doing all these things for your children, and suddenly they may leave the house, and then you're left with, well, who am I now? And you age out of groups that you were a part of, that were part of your social, network. And how conspiratorial like networks would offer a sense of community and belonging for them. And that's the lure.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, first of all, just being a woman, when you hit around 50, you become invisible and really lack, the culture sees you as lacking much purpose, right? I believe J.D. Vance was the one that said postmenopausal women were really only good to provide childcare for grandchildren. And that's kind of, I think that's basically what a lot of people think.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, because my background is, I was a stay-at-home mom for 23 years and went back to school after my last kid went to college. And, so it was interesting to learn some of this at this stage of life, because I recognized, I was like, wow, I'm over 50 and now I'm starting this new path, right? And there is no path when you're over 50. There is no path when you've stayed home to raise children.
Yeah.
There is no path. And that's for everybody, really. I mean, you can look around, whether you've already built a career in entertainment or whatever. Once you're past 50, you're kind of, you get pushed to the background. And so I think that with this stuff, especially because so many women are leading these groups, whereas men might be, in their groups talking about, 5G warfare or something, the women are actually going to school board meetings and changing the curriculum in your kids' public schools. They're getting the library books banned. When women want to be organized, they can wreak havoc, and they can also get away with being fierce and unfeminine, quote unfeminine, in the way the right typically looks at femininity, because you can be brash and you can be assertive, aggressive even. That's when you can yell and scream because you're doing it in defense of children or the moral teachings and moral trainings. And so I think that's another thing that makes this kind of movement so attractive, and why the pandemic was the perfect storm, because it brought everyone at home online. Many people going online looking for things they'd never looked at before, like alternative health remedies, tips on homeschooling as you try to get your 5-year-old to sit in front of a computer all day while you do your day job too. And so I think that so many women found that online, and because of the isolation, these groups formed. Everyone was just asking questions, and it started to splinter off into some people who went into a way that maybe I might share some of their ideas, and then other people went off in a completely different direction of anti-science beliefs, and that was really just something that exploded. And I see this alt wellness pipeline really having just such a fire hose effect on women.
Yes,
after the
it really
pandemic.
does.
Yeah. And so, and then it burst into the mainstream now, because many of the conspiracists I was studying back in 2021 and 22 now have cabinet positions in this administration. So it's pretty hard to dissuade people from their belief system when the power structure enables it and completes it, right?
Yeah.
And that's a real frustration. And I don't know what the answer is as long as that continues.
No. Just because we were on women here, before I turn it back over to Rich, one more question. When and talking your book, and I know you're about your documentary too, there's often the stereotype that women in these spaces are just these passive followers, and but they're really not. And you talk about how they do recruit and they do organize and they build these alternative worlds. So they're not just these passive, meek people. So it kind of gives them a sense of power within that maybe that they lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely empowering. I mean, I've watched Yvonne transform over 3 years. She was able to work out a lot of the anger she held inside of herself through her spiritual beliefs, and that's all great. I saw I think it improved her life in many ways until some of the conspiracies, right? And some of her beliefs that I do not share, that caused, I believe, harm to her real life, like dabbling in sovereign citizen language, where you stop paying bills and then have your house repossessed. I mean, her journey has allowed her to make peace with her choices, and she would disagree with me that it had been a bad thing. Her belief system allows most of these things to be explained through some sort of divine decision making, right? It's part of a soul contract where everything that happens to her was already decided before her soul ever entered her vessel. That's what she would say, I believe still, that her path was already predetermined based on her soul contract. And so she's able to explain things like having to go to prison for January 6th through that idea of a soul contract. And she can explain most bad and good things that might happen to her through that idea. So, I suppose in many ways, it's a belief system that operates much like religion, because it's completely faith-based. And in this case, I would say, some people call it, I don't believe that this is like some giant cult. I think that, yes, you can find some cult-like behaviors with people, but everyone has a different leader here, if they have a leader at all.
Yes, I
Yvonne
agree.
doesn't have a leader. There's no leader for her. They listen to Trump because they believe Trump is a white hat, which is a good guy, I guess, if you want to talk in most basic terms, good guys versus bad guys. A good guy who's here to expose the truth and the light, right? And every piece of evidence that comes out can be explained away through some kind of conspiracy or ignoring it. Just flat out ignoring it, which is what I saw happening for the last couple of months with some of this Epstein stuff. That was what really kind of floored me, is there was no one saying anything about how in September at one point he was like, if you believe this stuff, I don't even want your support. You're stupid. to the next month saying there are no files. This is a huge hoax. There's never been any. To the next month, there's, files coming out, and then there's a million more. So, but that contradiction doesn't seem to be a topic of conversation, which is very strange to me. And I don't know, maybe I'm not looking in the right places, but that's been my experience so far. It's been just like businesses. In fact, I'm seeing more transvestigating. I'm seeing more Hillary Clinton's email stuff again. And I'm just like, we're just doing the greatest hits all over.
Yeah. Agree.
When actually your biggest conspiracy came true,
I know,
without the Pizzagate piece of it.
It's right there for you guys, right?
Yes.
Okay, there you go, Rich.
Yes.
Hey guys, if I know that a lot of you are going to have questions, so get your hands up if you want to ask Noelle a question. For those who are joining us, we're with Noelle Cook. She's a researcher and author of a really great book called The Conspiracies. I think I see a hand here with Chris. Chris, do you want to come up and make a comment, ask a question?
No, I'm good right now, Rich. I didn't have a hand up, but thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Chris does, as a side note for plugging Chris, he does spaces every Saturday nights, and I'd really encourage you to check out his spaces as well. Always has lots of great guests on there. He's got another one coming up tomorrow night. So Noelle, I have something I want to ask you about, because I found to be one of the more fascinating parts of your book, amongst many fascinating parts, which is, could you talk about, as you put it, the conspiracy trade show that you attended?
Yeah,
Because
the Conscious Life Expo.
yes, that to me, I was engrossed in that, reading about that. If you can talk about that.
Yeah, that was a trip. I went to that in 2023. And that was because I had been talking to Yvonne for a year at that point, and I noticed this thing called the Los Angeles Conscious Life Expo. And so I decided to go to it and check it out. And it's the longest running New Age convention in the country. It's been going on for 20 some years. And I went in 2023, and it was so anti-vax, which was my first amazement. Like, the headliners, the speakers were Del Bigtree, who is, if you're not familiar with Del Bigtree, he's one of the biggest purveyors of anti-vax propaganda and anti-science rhetoric. Runs one of the largest anti-vax organizations in the world, I believe. He was there. Mickey Willis was there, the former videographer for Bernie Sanders turned Plandemic creator. So he was there showing Plandemic 3. That was its debut. So it was super anti-vax, anti-science, which surprised me, because when you think of a New Age expo, you think of crystals and numerology and astrology, which all of that was there too. But it was really leaning heavily into anti-science, and there was quite a bit of anti-government stuff going on too. I went back the following year in 24, and this year we had Lee Dundas, who is a Scientologist and right-wing organizer, who was also very influential during California's lockdowns during COVID, with her anti-vax rhetoric and movement, and worked with Children's Defense Fund, with RFK Jr. He appeared with her at many rallies over the years. She then went on tour with Mike Flynn's with the Reawaken tour there, where she traveled with British conspiracist Sasha Stone, and then Scott McKay was the third of that group. And they were part of that traveling show that went across the country, which were big movement builder events, by the way. Those were ways to keep people engaged. We're coming to your city, and then they'd have the local Jan 6 celebs there, or whatever influencer might be available. And so I watched, that happening over the course of these years, of these movement building, these roving movement builders that kind of took over with these reawaken tours and all these other patriot in quotes focused tours. And so I think I forget how I got all the way out there in that lane, but while I'm there, too bad the left doesn't do more of that, right? Because that's community building. That was community building.
Truly, that is. I mean, when you think about it, it really is.
Absolutely.
I can guarantee you it was. If you think back to March of 2022, when they had the American version of the truck convoy roll into Hagerstown, Maryland on March 5th. Well, March 4th, but March 5th was the grand opening day. And I went, it was like a carnival. They had a funnel cake booth. They had bouncy houses for the kids. There were people speaking in tongues with a shofar on the left over there. There were lots of pro-life imagery plastered on the sides of trucks. It was quite an event. But what happened, I went back 2 weeks later because they were still there. And what I saw was very different. It was no longer the carnival with fireworks at night and the live band on stage. It was a village that had been set up, complete with shower stalls, someone who had donated their services as a barber. Locals were donating fresh produce from their gardens and eggs from their chickens, and people were going to Walmart and stocking up for whatever food this place might need. And this became like this convoy village where they set up like a store underneath the bleachers where if take something, leave something kind of thing. It was crazy to watch because I'm like, do you guys know what this is, right?
I watched that I watched it. I know exactly what you're talking about. It was something.
Then, yeah. It's like, isn't this everything you scream about? Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You don't need to go get a towel from the free booth, right? Isn't that what you guys say? But it was like this total cooperative. It was lovely, actually, except for occasionally when someone just happens to start saying racist things, and that was the problem. It's like some of the way they were behaving. This thing wasn't yes, it was nice to see people helping each other, but who are we talking
There's
about?
that big but.
Yeah, there's a huge.
Yeah.
It made me laugh though, because I'm thinking, okay, so you're capable of seeing how this works, right? So why don't you see how it works? But
true.
But what was really fascinating about that is I met people that second week who had been there that day I had come originally on that March 5th. And they'd been so inspired and had found their people and wanted to feel that feeling again so badly that they would drive home to places like Indiana for the work week. But then Friday night, get back in the car and come to Hagerstown, pitch a tent, and hang out with their new fam for the weekend. And I thought that was so fascinating. I even watched a couple of people leave their real lives behind and go on the road with this circus. And so
it's that sense of community and belonging, right?
Yep. And it was kind of bled over. Some of those people then went over into the Freedom Corner sphere when that became a thing in August of 22. And then another faction split off and went a different direction to West Virginia. So I mean, it was just these movement builders that kept happening because I used to make fun of it, right? Look, people, they're going to go stand on the overpass and wave the flags of the trucks. But you know what? It was brilliant. Because not only did it give you a way to participate if all you could do is wave a flag over the overpass, people were able to deliver things at truck stops, food. I helped unpack a semi truck full of donations that had been picked up from across the country on their way to Maryland. And it was amazing to watch because you had streamers. They had the whole streamer ecosystem set up so that you could participate from your couch. You could participate by donating. Yep. You could participate by flag waving, or you could just ship post as participation. And it's so that is movement building. And the left doesn't have anything like that. And if you watch, the Christian nationalists have been doing that for years with the revivals every year. That's one of our biggest problems, I think. We don't have any third spaces, and we don't even have self-serving movement builders.
Agree.
Hey guys, if anyone has questions, make sure you get your hands up. We'll get you up here to any comments, any questions that you have. That was that part of the book, Noelle, with the trade show. Just explains a lot, though. I felt like in reading it, so much of, especially the post-COVID world of conspiracism and conspirituality, the way that you really went into detail in terms of how that world looks and how for so many in these conspiracy communities, when the rapture doesn't occur, it just means that it seems like, and I want to ask you about this point, it seems that when the rapture doesn't occur, they just double and triple down on their beliefs. Is that what you experienced in your research of people who they're waiting for the rapture, it doesn't happen, but it just further solidifies their belief?
Well, I mean, that's part of, you don't want to be wrong, right? And part of conspiracism is having special knowledge. And so it's easy to cling on to that. But again, I'm going to go back to just any sort of faith-based belief system. That's a feature, right? It's a feature of things being promised that may or may not come true necessarily. But there's always got to be a reason for it. There's a reason for it. And that can come either because there was something divine that occurred, or because it just is going to take a little bit more time, or to expose it all, it's going to take a little bit longer. It's a choose your own adventure. I keep saying that because there really are no rules oftentimes. The only rules are if you offend your group, you'll be shunned, right? If you go against the group, you'll just get kicked out or banned from it.
Well, that happened to Yvonne, right? Because she kind of got kicked out of her church because she was trying to push QAnon stuff on them. And
right.
they kind of
I'm not even
ostracized
sure.
her and were like,
Yeah, I'm not sure she was pushing
no.
QAnon stuff on them exactly.
Well, the video she was,
But the videos,
as I
right? She was
recall.
sharing videos,
Yes.
yes. And
That's it.
and there was a disconnect for her because she was becoming less enchanted with organized religion. Much of that was through the pandemic restrictions. When I remember one conversation when she said to me that, when they closed the doors to the church, that was my aha moment about the church being part of this man-made system designed to keep us complacent slaves, because her beliefs were that God would never shut the doors to the church to his followers under any circumstances. And so that was kind of one of the reasons that she started to distance herself from the church. And the more she was saying stuff like that, when you're talking to a group of evangelical Christians, is going to start to alienate them further and further. Because if you're saying, listen, you guys are slaves and you're not thinking, use your critical thinking skills, many of them are going to distance themselves. And I think, and that's the dilemma, right? It's a double-edged sword. Is the more people in the real world distance themselves, the more people have to be online because there's really nowhere else to interact. Although studies are showing that people are less likely to engage in real world socializing since the pandemic than ever before, which doesn't surprise me. I think we probably all still have a bit of a hangover from that. But that's really bad, a really bad combination, because algorithms are not your friends. And you click one thing and you get fed more. And if it hits you on that right day when you're having problems with your bank, or you're having problems with any system that a conspiracy can explain, it's easy to latch on to that because it helps explain things, why bad things happen. It helps explain the unexplainable. It helps people feel powerful in powerless situations. And women in particular don't have a lot of opportunities, particularly on the right and particularly after 50. Right? They don't have a lot of opportunities for people to listen to them, or to have special knowledge, or to feel empowered in those ways. This is where wisdom comes in for them. And women's intuition, is a big thing. And so women, I think middle-aged women feel somewhat more empowered because our intuition is more tuned up maybe than, say, Gen Z, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, we also, Noelle, this is another point I want to ask you about, because you've really articulated it well. And if I butcher this, you need to correct me on it. But you've made a comment to me in the past a few times about how Gen X is the first generation to really truly live our lives online.
Yeah. That, because I think by year 2, well, after I kind of discovered that pattern, and then I started noticing everything else, right? How old everybody was. I'm like, this is my generation. What happened to us? And so I kept asking, like, what happened to Gen X? And so yeah, I think I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about childhood with being a latchkey kid, for example. And I'm an elder Gen Xer, so I was born in '67, so I'm year 2 of Gen X. So we're the first generation, and I lived this. My parents were divorced when I was 5, and my mother worked full time. And by the time I was in 3rd grade, probably maybe 4th, I was coming home and taking a key out from under the mat and letting myself in the house along with my little brother. And that's how it worked. But I think back now, you got home after school, but you were told, do not open the door for anyone. Do not answer the phone. Call me when you get home. So there already is a culture of fear. It's not safe to be here by myself, right? So we were kind of raised in that fear culture.
That's true.
And that to be suspicious of everyone and everything. We were the first generation to sit at the breakfast table with children's smiling faces on milk cartons, with the word missing on them. That started in the 80s. We had Satanic Panic in the 80s. We had Michelle Remembers. We had Flowers in the Attic. We had, which was a real disconnect then, because all that was going on for me, like in elementary and middle school. But then high school rolls around, and now it's all John Hughes films. And now women are responsible for Molly Ringwald better give her underwear to the nerd so he can be cool with his bros. Again, we still wonder, why are we asking women to take care of men's emotional well-being? Well, ever thus, right? That's how we were raised. And so you could look at all of these different messages that we grew up with. What was our goal in the 80s? When I say our, I'm talking collective. I don't mean mine and yours, just to be clear. But when you're in the yuppies were a thing. You wanted to be upwardly mobile, right? And so I remember, I was by this 85 when I was a senior in high school. There were actually a couple of weirdos who were walking around with like briefcases and ties. And yes, I recognize today they were probably dealing drugs, but at the time I didn't know that. but I mean, what I mean? We grew up with that stuff, and I just grew up knowing I didn't trust anyone or anything unless you showed me. Yeah. And I don't know why. That's just how I work. And so that's why I think Gen X is really susceptible to some of this stuff, especially, you cannot forget this part about the internet, right? You have influencers now, and you have people whose names you recognize. You have politicians who are telling you there are chemtrails in the sky, and they're trying to pass legislation to ban them. We're also a generation who took civics classes. And I think we were misled in some ways to believe that there was some kind of standard for running for office when there actually is not, it turns out, because we were taught to trust these people who are making laws for us in many ways. Yeah. I really realized that when I went back to school and I'm sitting in class with all these young kids who were like, because I'm like, well, why do I care about facial recognition if I'm not breaking the law? Well, this is exactly why today, right? Because I think our generation doesn't think in those terms, because we straddled analog and digital. We literally came of age and became young adults when the internet hit. And then we've all performed our midlife online, our midlife crisis online. There's a reason Ashley Madison. You don't have to go to the bar to cheat anymore. You can do it from the comfort of your own living room while your wife's sitting across the room from you. Right. It's like Gen X did all that. Yeah. And then we were the ones who trained our own children to use the internet, which is kind of scary, right? There is a lot of discernment. Yeah, because there is no discernment. I now have gotten to the point where I'm so skeptical. Even big names I recognize as legitimate for years, I go check everything because I'm so distrustful now. Because there's so much disinformation being spread so quickly. It's kind of, everybody recognizes the point, move fast and break things, but it's hard to keep up with it. And so I just verify everything at this point.
Truly, I do too.
Everyone, if you've got a question, comment that you want to make for Noelle, make sure you get your hands up. We'll make sure we get you up here. These are my words, Noelle. Not, I don't think you put it this way, so I don't mean to put words in your mouth. But in reading the book, The Conspiracists, we've linked the book in the comments here. So for anyone who wants to get to Noelle's site and check out her work and get the book, Shelby posted that link to Noelle's website here. You really talk about the algorithms as God, and how much they control so much of what we see, and what they really saw with Yvonne and Tammy. And with Yvonne in particular, there's one part of her story that I wanted to ask you about. Was just she was so certain that she stopped paying all of her bills.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, she lost her house. And she would have lost her car, except there were restrictions during the pandemic era where they weren't repossessing people's cars for a while because she stopped paying her payment. But see, here's what happened. She stopped paying her car payment. And then eventually she's getting these repo notices. And then they do what they always do when they try to settle stuff. They start offering her a lower amount. Say she owes, $12,000. And they say, well, if you pay $4,000, we'll call it even, right? We'll call it a day. So she sees that the system can be played. I don't want to say sees the system can be played, because that's not the motivation here. What she was witnessing is the rules don't apply. They change them as they go. Does that make sense?
That does. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And she's
Yep.
not
It
wrong.
does.
And she's not wrong. And the same can be said about Tammy also. And again, this is where class comes in to a degree with Tammy. Tammy's kids were caught up in the Kids for Cash scandal in Pennsylvania because of poverty. Because if you didn't have a private attorney, you were very likely to sign a document provided by the clerk of the court telling that you could be in and out in 5 minutes if you just waived your right to counsel. And because of these minor infractions committed by these children, no parent thought anything could happen. And so they signed away their right to counsel rather than what the court told them would be probably all day, maybe tomorrow, waiting for a public defender. And this was because two judges who happened to be Democrats had been taking kickbacks from a private developer who had just put in a for-profit juvenile detention center. And part of the kickbacks were to keep it filled. And, that's what happened. It was right on the heels of Columbine, when schools were taking a zero tolerance policy to anything suggesting violence, right?
Yeah.
So it's, so when you have systems that fail you left and right, and there's no recourse for it, there's no compensation, no one's going to get in trouble for it. I think it's easy to start to believe in some crazy things because you've seen some crazy things.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could, I was just thinking on how Yvonne and Tammy kind of navigated, you could speak on either one if you want to, but a lot of conspiracies, well, the majority that I've even looked at, and I'm sure you've looked at, have the anti-Semitic undertones. Sometimes people don't realize it, and there's those racist tones. And sometimes they have people of color in their family, or they may have members of the LGBTQIA plus community in their families, or people they know, how they navigate that, or what you saw with that.
Yeah, so that's a weird one because yes, I'll use Tammy as an example. She does have biracial grandchildren, and she adores them, and she would definitely say she is not racist. I guarantee that. In fact, and she demonstrated that once because her loneliness was such that when some Mormon sisters paid her a visit, she let them in and let them believe that she might be interested in converting. And she told me, well, no, I'm not going to convert. And when I get sick of them, I'll just whip out my tarot cards and they'll take off thinking I'm a witch. And she laughed about that, right? But her point was, they're going to call me every day. They're going to text me every day. They're going to give me an assignment. They're going to give me reading assignments, and they're going to keep me company, and they're going to invite me to someone's house for dinner every week. And I'm going to do it till I get bored. And so that's what she did. But what it wasn't that she got bored. What happened was one of her reading assignments about 3 months in was the part of the Book of Mormon that talks about dark skin as sinful or being, and she immediately stopped and she texted the sisters and said, I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to participate with a religion that believes my grandchildren are sinners or evil, right? And so that was it for her. And she stopped. So, but that wasn't a key feature in her life, right? That was a supplement. That was an addendum.
Yeah.
And so what would it, my guess, I know it is because there's lots of anti-Black racism that goes on in these spaces I've been observing for years. And what I see people do is it's like going to like hometown buffet, right? 90% of that stuff I'm not going to touch, but there might be 10% I will. It's so,
right.
And I think that's what they do. I think it's what we're trained to do. Again, Gen X has been trained to kind of just look the other way. We don't talk about sensitive issues. We don't talk about the real world stuff, right? Just kind of pretend it's not there and just be nice. And so that's what these groups do. And again, it's very participatory. I think people are hitting retweet without even reading what they're sharing, just because it's coming from a particular person, maybe, or it has the person they don't like in the photograph or whatever. There, again, media literacy, lack of discernment is a real problem.
Yeah. Thank you.
Guys, again, anyone who questions, comments, get your hands up. We'll make sure we get you up here with our guest, Noelle Cook, author of The Conspiracies. And in addition to the book, Noelle, Shelby mentioned this before, alluded to it, I wanted to ask you about. So talk about the documentary film
that
that complements the book.
Yeah, and first, neither of these things were supposed to happen. Like I said, the academic project got shelved because of my decision to get more personally involved with Tammy's situation. But then an acquisitions editor from Broadleaf approached me about my research, and I submitted a book proposal. And the same thing happened with the film. I was doing some research on a different topic, and she was so interested in what I was doing, she decided to do this documentary. And so it's gone to some film festivals, and it's actually having its London premiere in April. I can't say where yet, but we've got about, I think, 5 cinemas set up for London screenings with question and answers following in mid-April. And other than that, there is an educational distributor. So people, it is in universities and public libraries in some places, or it can be ordered if it's not. And it's really just, it was a road trip. It turned into a road trip, which again wasn't planned. It was just the way things kind of happened. And it was from the Vaughn sentencing back to Idaho. We stopped along the way. We'd already planned to go talk to Tammy. And so we stopped to talk to Tammy and met someone else that Yvonne had met online. And that was, it's kind of just an interesting, I think people are kind of floored sometimes to hear some of the things that come out of people's mouths. And I think what I can say with authenticity is that these people, there's some genuine beliefs here that seem completely outlandish to us. But I can tell you that debunking them isn't the way to go, and arguing isn't the way to go. I ask a lot of questions, and then I maybe just let it sit on an unanswered one, right? And then go back to it later, because that's the one thing I know. It's not about facts, it's about feelings. For most everyone I've talked to. And again, you're not asking someone just not to believe something that's untrue. You're asking them if they're actually going to stand up and say it out loud. They're going to have to be willing to lose their community, and they're going to have to be willing not to be able to participate any longer. And that's a huge ask, especially for a lot of middle-aged women who are, and probably don't have a lot of opportunities for socializing.
I think I saw a hand, Rich. Get
Okay.
money, maybe. Get money. Did you have your hand up, or were you just waving hello? Did you want to come up and ask a question? Yes, no? You can put your hand back up if you'd like to. I couldn't tell. I thought I saw something waving. Oh, there's a requested. There we go.
There was a request here.
Wrath's coming up.
Wrath, go ahead. You're up.
Hi, Rich.
Hi.
So full disclosure, I'm friends with all these people, but anyway,
She is our friend.
yes. First I want to say, Noelle, we are all extremely proud of you. You've done such a wonderful job with this. And, I, for one, can say that, between you and knowing some formers like Sassy and, even, I don't know, we know a bunch of them. So, and I'm not meaning to leave anybody out. I'm trying to be a little bit brief because I have 2 questions. So the first question is, recently, like David Hogg made a post that said, whatever happened to QAnon? And of course, the far and wide, the reactions were the same as, the one that went viral from our friend Mike Rothschild that said, well, they're in the government.
Exactly.
And which is true. I mean, Trump just posted a quacko election conspiracy theory 2 days ago. So whatever, that apparently sent Tulsi Gabbard to get records from Fulton County. But my question is that, so during the Biden years, I know from listening to you talk about some of these people and the ongoing conversations that you had, that, occasionally there was progress, I guess I would say, like one got a job and had, was trying to kind of step back a little bit, that kind of thing. And then when Trump got reelected and all of these people made their way into the government now, have they backslid, or do you feel like they never really stepped out of it? Or like, what's your take on the affirmation that they got from that election?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think either of them ever stepped away from it. Again, Tammy, for example, talking on the phone with me versus what she does online can be two different things. We can deal in a shared reality when we talk on the phone, but it doesn't stop her from participating in her online groups as if it's 2021, right? So again, that's where I start to
How do
see
you
that.
see that? Is it like, I mean, is it like two halves of her brain? Like she has a rational side?
No, that's a group. That's a group. I mean, what do
It's
you?
the community.
It's like think about. I keep trying to think about times when I was influenced by groups of people I didn't really like or have much in common with, and I'm thinking like high school, right? There was always like a big group that maybe you didn't like most of the people, but you hung out because otherwise you would miss out on some party or you would miss out on. It's kind of like that. I mean, if you don't show up in your groups, you're going here. Here's a great example. Actually, this just happened. Tammy was telling me the other day, I asked her about a woman who's actually mentioned in the book named Jeanette, who gave her a dragon keychain for her birthday because Tammy calls herself, one of her grandchildren called her Dragon Slayer Grandma. And so that's what she calls herself. And so this woman had given her keychain, had been very supportive and kind to her. They were both conspiracists, but they, and this is people always like roll their eyes at me when I say, but they were actually very kind people. And they didn't have abhorrent beliefs. Again, I got lucky because I didn't pick people who were openly saying abhorrent things, or I couldn't, the people who did do that, I didn't get to know very long because I couldn't do that. But where was I going with that? Tammy. Okay. She tells me since she got a job, and yes, she did get a job. And then she got first she got a car. And we were talking after she served her prison sentence, Tammy. She only had 20 days. And when she got out of prison, she was very distraught because she's like, how do I improve my life when I have no transportation and no public transportation in my area? Because there were no buses there. She lives in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. And so we were talking once, and she decided to ask one of the J6 groups that had been raising funds if she could get some money for a used car so she could get her life back on track. And one of them gave her some funds for that car. She did go get a job, and she still has that job today. And so she, just by virtue of working now, she's offline more, right? And so because she's offline more, it doesn't mean she doesn't participate the same way when she's there, but she's already experienced what it means not to be online as often because Jeanette, very recently, has now gone from conspirituality and has kind of shunned that stuff and has fallen in with more evangelical Christian nationalists. And so she's been criticizing Tammy's spiritual beliefs of late, which has caused them to kind of part ways. And so you can see what happens.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? That just happened recently, where she told me that story. And so I thought, okay, well, that is really interesting. So, with quote, normal friend in the real world, you don't have to be online together all the time to maintain your friendship. You can call each other occasionally, you can text. But in this world, friendship means participation and belonging to the same groups, right? And so when Tammy was no longer that person, that this particular woman I'm talking about is a caregiver for both of her parents who have Alzheimer's. So she's isolated in a rural area as the caregiver for two parents who have health issues. And so she spends the rest of her time is online. And if your friend isn't going to be online with you all the time, your friend's going to kind of get kicked out of that group because especially if they're spouting stuff the new group doesn't believe in, because some of those groups will ostracize you for some of these beliefs. Somebody asked about the anti-Semitism earlier, and I didn't say anything about that. You did, Shelby.
Yes.
Yeah. So that goes with the same with the anti-Black racism. They don't recognize it. Now, if you try to explain it to them, they'll make excuses for it. And it's a lesson I haven't delved completely into yet because I need some guidance on how to have some of those conversations. Because it's not worth an argument. It's not something I want to argue about. It's something I would like to write out. And I'm hoping I do say this. Tammy did read the book, and Tammy said it gave her some things to think about. She has not expanded on that yet. But I will ask her more specifically in the future what that was, because none of these women would identify themselves as anti-Semitic or racist, even though they share those memes and they participate in the same groups with the same rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very much a disconnect. So no one's taken that off ramp, Christina. They rap. Sorry, they all go that same direction still. Tammy is probably the one I would say has one foot in the real world and one foot online still. Yvonne, I believe, for Yvonne it's different. Everything Yvonne did came true, right? Yvonne's one of the very few women who took her case to trial because she refused to quote lie and take a plea deal, because if she had taken a plea deal, she would have had to sign something that she did that she claimed she did not do. And so she took it to trial against her, she insisted on taking a stand, even though her attorneys begged her not to. And she was convicted of 2 felonies and 4 misdemeanors. But she did that because she believed her truth so firmly that she was willing to take that consequence, even if it meant 30-month sentence, which is what she got. And so Yvonne went to prison, and she had done a program that allowed her early release. So she is at a halfway house the night the pardons came down. She had just been sent back to Idaho, was on her way home. And so she gets out of prison. So here's this woman who did all this sacrifice, right? In her mind, she sacrificed for the truth. And in the end, she was vindicated because she was been pardoned. And her case was on appeal. And so when she was pardoned, it's like it never happened for her. If your case was on appeal, it got wiped completely off of your record. And so for Yvonne, that's just another reward for standing firm for the truth. And so there's been no movement that I can see anyway, where,
So I'll hold it
how her
to the 3 and 4.
how her spiritual views have evolved since I've spoken to her in depth. I don't know for sure, but I thought it looks similar to what it was before, but I don't think no one's changed their minds. Let's put it that way.
So the move of I can't remember her name now, but their friend to white nationalist views is a little bit scary, because now you're talking about like we talked about how in previous discussions about how a lot of these women kind of tiptoe into this via like a wellness pipeline, and it's a wellness to conspiracism pipeline, and now it's a wellness to Nazi pipeline, and that's just a little bit scary.
Yeah, but it's been that way for a while. I first encountered that back in 2022, I think it was, or maybe 21, when somehow trad wives I had to learn all this stuff from the beginning, because every time they led me into a new space and I'm like, a trad what? And then I go and I learn about this, and I'm studying this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, well, I did that full time, guys, and it's not nearly as romantic as you're making it.
Right.
Right. And so, then I start to look at some of these influencers that are doing this trad wife influencing, the same thing with all wellness stuff. And you start to look at the blocks of hashtags. And if you look at those blocks really carefully, there was one in particular, was an account from New Zealand, and she would have vintage sewing patterns, and it was always vintage sewing, this and that. Somewhere in there would be hashtag not so. Keep going a little bit longer, and you'll see hashtag Uncle Ted. And then you realize, wait a minute, because this woman also looks kind of lefty in some weird ways. But then you realize this accelerationism that kind of binds a lot of that white identity, whether it's nationalist, whether it's populist, whether it's whatever. This woman would be able to do all this kind of, it sounded very yoga-y mom type of stuff, but also be having these horrendous hashtags, like Ted Kaczynski. And you think, how does Ted Kaczynski come into play here? But that's how a lot of this works with the whole escape modernity part, right? So you got trad wives, trad casts, but then you also have a lot of accelerationist white nationalists who want the white ethno-state stuff, and that's how those groups all kind of coalesce. And then they capture the people waiting to catch the Kali Yuga, to surf the Kali Yuga. And so
Yes.
you've got such extreme opposing views on, I always think of like an LA freeway or a trade show, like you mentioned, Rich, in the book, where everyone's got a booth there, right? You want to surf the Kali Yuga, there's a booth over there. You might get a keychain. And if you want some anti-government militia stuff, there's a guy over there with a conspiracy map on the wall. Grab a bookmark from, that's a terrible idea. Not a bookmark, but a pocket knife from him, right? So what I'm saying, but that's kind of what the trade show idea was for me, as I watched people walking into different spaces online and different movement building activities like Conscious Life Expo, like the truck convoy, like the border convoy, like these revivals. And you see people leaving with little pieces of ideologies so that they can stay on the same freeway, all of them, 6-lane highway here, and everyone's got their own lane, and you're cool as long as you don't swerve too far into the other lane. You can all ride together towards those same goals. And that's kind of how I view
That's a good analogy.
Trade show. Because you absolutely cannot make sense of how a Christian nationalist and how a really devout trad cat. Well, I guess a lot of the charismatic religions do have some supernatural stuff going on in them, but we're not talking just supernatural stuff. We're talking people who are saying they have advanced alien DNA, right? And they worship something called spirit and creator. and that Jesus is just one of the many ascended masters. And that's always been a disconnect of how true believers in evangelical Christianity can accept that it's more bodies. So I
And the
don't
thing
know.
that those trade shows and the people with merch and websites and sewing patterns and whatever too is that you have, a group that are true believers and that are trying to, never work a day in their lives by loving what they do and sell things that go with their beliefs. And then you have people who know that this is an easy group to take advantage of. There are people making lots of money off of
100%.
these people.
You know what the saddest part to me is and was, and I still see it all the time, is like at the Conscious Life Expo, but this also happens in wellness community spaces online all the time. People will buy something like someone at the Conscious Life Expo was using their 7-year-old daughter at the time to hawk these energy patches because the 7-year-old daughter, another way to exploit children, is a blue avian child. Like again, this child is an alien, and she's been told she's an alien by her mother since she was about 3. And now she does healings for people. And I watched people, like my husband is in his last weeks of liver cancer. I'm desperate, and go spend $250 on some sort of energy healing, which is a piece of cardboard with maybe a gem glued onto it or something that's going to. That's what's sad is people sell hope to desperate people. People sell hope to scared people.
It really is.
And they have an incentive to keep you enraged, to keep you fearful, keep you seeking. And I think that's where algorithms also come into play, where there's a disconnect again. Some of it's age. Don't know how this works, right? Oh, if I keep searching alternative health remedies, I'm going to keep getting weirder and weirder stuff until I land in Love Is One's Gaia store,
Yeah.
and colloidal silver is being offered to me. So, or colloidal silver. I always say it wrong, but that's how that happened. It's really easy because it happened to me when I was researching. That's how I was doing it. I was just following people, and pretty soon I would get way more requests or recommendations for people that had the same beliefs, and there are a lot of them.
Sure. Get
I'm
money.
seeing kind of
Oh, do you have another question, Rath? I'm sorry.
I do, but I just wanted to say I'm seeing kind of the back end of that right now. If you go and look at measles, like on Facebook, and you pick up some of the people that are in the Crunchy Mom groups and different anti-vax groups and stuff, you'll see these horror stories of people that are terrified because they live in South Carolina and, we're having this horrible measles thing. And they're like, I've never vaccinated my child, but now I'm thinking about it because they just had COVID and the flu and their immune systems. I mean, like people, my 6-month-old baby is going to get the measles, because they can't be vaccinated yet because, nobody's vaccinated. There's a lot of horror out there. There's a lot of very scared parents, and they put themselves in a position by following this stuff. I just wanted to ask my other question really quick because I know we kind of went off in the weed. Well, not really, but and that was, I don't know if you've mentioned it in here yet because I was kind of doing 12 things, but did Yvonne and Tammy watch the movie or read the book, and what did they think of it? And have you heard from any other people like that are not them or their their family, friends, whatever, who have read the book or watched, like that are MAGA or QAnon or besides Rich, that may have read the book?
Okay, so let's see. The first question was, have they seen the film? No, not yet, because there's nowhere for them to see. I did tell Tammy the other day that she could request her public library get it until I can get her a link or something, or we have it shown somewhere near her. As far as the book goes, Tammy has read the book. I sent her a copy. I have not spoken to Yvonne for about a month or so. We were going to schedule a time to talk, but we haven't had a chance to do that. And I just, I'm waiting for her to do that. She may or may not be interested in reading the book. And if she has read the book, she may or may not. I know she's not going to agree with a lot of the things I said. She'll agree with the things, she knows what she said, but she'll disagree with some of my assessments, I think, or me looking for ways to call conspiracies coping mechanisms. Because again, Yvonne's belief system has a soul contract involved, and you really
Well, to
can't
her,
mess
they're
with a
not
soul contract.
conspiracies.
What's that?
To her, they're not conspiracies. So it,
Right, exactly. Well, exactly. In fact, that was one thing she did say about the book. That's the only thing I've heard about the book so far is the publisher puts out like a blurbs that they put on Amazon and that sort of thing, or on the jacket of the book. And one of the things the publisher had put in there is like, if we don't understand this, we have no way to combat it. And I did see Yvonne put a question like, why would you want to combat it? Why, and I did tell her, well, first of all, I didn't know. I get to say, well, I didn't write that actually. The publisher does, because that's true. But she doesn't understand why that's a problem for people because she thinks we're asleep, right? And again, secret knowledge is empowering. And so I don't know how, I don't think things change for people unless it really hits up against something personal or a core belief or value that they hold dear, or it really impacts their family in some kind of real negative way. I don't think there's a lot of room because there's so much at stake. It's not just not believing the conspiracies anymore.
Thank you. Get Money, do you want to ask your question to Noelle?
I have a few questions. Like, I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to take that long. First of all, my first question is to Rich. Actually, I like what you're doing with leaving MAGA, and I have a YouTube show, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in being a guest on it.
Send me a direct message. We can talk, Get Money. Sure.
All right. And as far as with for Noelle, how do we get people out of the extremism? What would your what would your plan be to get people to stop for this stop?
Well, I think one of the most important options is what Rich is doing, and that's creating a space and a community for people who have questions, who can come without fear of ridicule, a place to receive support. Maybe you want to dip one toe in and one toe out for a while. I think it's just good to have a space you can go to. Number one, I don't know how you get people out. That's the $1 million question, isn't it? My suggestion is that when talking to someone who does not share your reality, to maybe try to lead with curiosity first rather than disbelief or ridicule. Because if you can ask someone questions and you start to understand where that belief was formed, occasionally, very rarely, but occasionally there'll be a moment that you can insert a fact into it. But I think I've kind of come to the conclusion that the best thing to do is just leave the line open. And because I'm not going to change anybody's mind by telling them they're wrong. And they're going to have to figure that out for themselves, just like they got into this themselves. And I think leaving that line open allows them to have a place, a friend or whoever that is has a place to come back to if there is someone they need to talk to or question. I don't think there's any foolproof because I think everybody enters from a different place and for a different reason. And extremism is a really, really, really broad word. There's no real great word for some of this because extremism, we tend to think of it more as extremists. We tend to militarize that word with terrorists almost. And that's not what this is, but this is extremism in the sense of belief systems, if that makes sense. Language has gotten hard to use because we kind of use things so freely that they lose meaning. But I think I don't have an answer for you to how to get them out. I just suggest trying to keep communication open when you can. And obviously, if you're part of a marginalized group that's attacked, that's a big ask, and not for you probably. That's the work for other people to do who are able to try to help bring people out of these hateful spaces. So does that answer your question?
That does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Spencer next. Hi, Spencer. How are you tonight?
Hi, Spencer.
Hi, I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yep. We got you. We can hear you.
Oh, great. Yeah, I had a question about something Noelle said about 10, 15 minutes ago, but what she just said perked my ears up also. So maybe I'll start with the one that was previous, and then we'll see if we get to the... you were talking about a series of people who were sort of in... I think you were talking about the sort of trade show aspect and how they would appear to not have any problem with kind of being next to or in a what looks like a movement with other people who would appear to have conflicting views. I think you were talking about Christians, and then also kind of star seeds that would be saying things about Jesus that we would maybe think that Christians should find to be um, not acceptable, but they do seem to. Is perhaps that they have a what might be called like an erosion of principles, such that they don't hold to hardly any of the principles that you might expect them to hold to, except for like one or two central principles which surround the maintaining the reputation of Donald Trump, essentially, which is, I think, maybe an interesting way to look at it. But it does, in looking at it that way, it does provide another interesting question that I have for people who would oppose this political movement of MAGA, which is that if you're looking at a movement that is willing to essentially give up all principles except for a devotion to one guy, is it feasible to think that you can move against this without giving anything up yourself? Is it feasible to think you can do this without giving up on any of your own principles? And this is an important question, because this is a thing that currently divides us. We each think that we have a set of principles we should hold to, but sometimes in holding to some of them, we fail to come together enough to properly stop this. And these things are used as wedges against us. So we don't want to give up any principles, but maybe, it might be easier if we did. So this is sort of the trap that we're in. So I want to pose this to everyone here, essentially, probably mostly Noelle and Rich, as the people who probably have the most in-depth kind of thoughts on this. But do you think we can win without giving up anything? Or
It depends on
if
what you
we
mean by giving
do,
up.
well, okay, right. I mean, we see what the right has given up. They've given up reality, right?
Well, yeah, in Yvonne's case, she would say she's given up free will.
Okay, sure. But she holds to her own principles just for herself, but she doesn't appear to expect Donald Trump to hold to those same principles that she would hold to for herself.
Well, most of
Right?
these people, I would say, most of these people don't worship Donald Trump in the way you might imagine. The women I talk to, the ones I'm talking to, he's a central figure for sure, and they do, but they also see the flaws. That's the interesting part, because God works through flawed men is the example, is the reason, right?
Right.
Or because he's part of the Galactic Federation Council of Life. You should pick which one you want. But I don't think anyone sees him necessarily. He's the leader giving the directions because he's the guy with the special knowledge he's imparting to them, right? And when you said what happened to QAnon, well, QAnon's been signaled for a long time now. Trump's been signaling to QAnon for months, if not years at this point. Whether it be music he plays at his rallies that's assigned to QAnon, or what he did in September when he announced on True Social that every American was about to get a med bed. Well, that's a huge thing in QAnon. That there's this hidden advanced technology where these med beds are available. The government's hiding this technology from us, and they can cure everything. They can regenerate limbs. It's like the Matrix. But Big Pharma, there's the deep state and Big Pharma are in cahoots to keep it from the people. And so Donald Trump posted an AI generated video that looked like Larry Trump was interviewing him on some Fox News show. And it shows him sitting at a desk talking about every American's getting a med bed card, and it's all coming soon. It was taken down within 12 hours. But in all the conspiracy groups I was in online, did you see that? Oh my God, he said he's giving us a message, guys. Hold on a little bit longer. So when you say, what is it going to take to get people out of this stuff? How do you do that when the president of the United States is stringing you along?
Well, getting people out of it is definitely a thing that we should work on doing. But I think that part of that is going to have to be removing the figurehead of, the central focus of this from the seat of political power, right? Like politically defeating MAGA as it appeared to start in, the 2020 election, but failed to stick. I mean, this is the question on everyone's mind now. How do we win? How do we get back? How do we get to a normal place again politically, even if after that it's not the end, you still have to deal with a large number of people who have all of these beliefs. But I think that it's a losing battle if you have still a Donald Trump in the White House doing everything. So how do we win? Is it feasible? Because I think there's a lot of people who think you obviously don't think this, but many people, ordinary people, who think that this can be undone without them having to lose anything, without them having to give up anything. No comforts, no, they don't have to, have any economic consequences, anything like that. Like, there's still a lot of people in the States who think that this is just some version of American exceptionalist behavior, which I think we're far, far past. But they think they'll somehow this will move to a place and they won't have to have any loss of any kind from this, in principles or in money or anything. So do you think that there's a way we can communicate that, or there's something you might tell people to expect that they might have to give up to get out of this
No,
politically?
I mean, I have no idea what people are going to have to give up, because that's, again, a very individual thing. Because don't forget, protest is a privilege also. And so not everybody has the same, like today, like there were some small businesses where I live that had no choice but to stay open because their employees rely on, so there's all these apologies about, we're sorry, we have to be open, we're going to donate a portion of proceeds, but not everybody can participate in the same ways. And so I think the only way we can do this is to find your comfort level. Try to approach it from a local level. Get involved with some, fix some of the systems. There's so many things we can do that we can actually find some common ground with, quote, the other side, whatever that means. But there's a lot of people who've been to prison who are going to have some ideas about prison reform these days that they might not have had 10 years ago, right? Now that they've gotten to experience it firsthand. Or maybe there's some of those people that could work together to talk about some of that. There's ways of doing that, but I don't think on a mass scale. This is a global problem, and it's a global problem that's been created over the period of 50 some, well, forever, right? But especially over the last 50 years. As people's lives become more and more stressful, more fragmented, people are working 2-3 jobs part-time so that employers can get out of giving employer-based healthcare, which is the only way to get healthcare in this country. So we have systems and politicians who never work for you, right? Nothing changes. And oftentimes it doesn't matter, like when Biden was in the White House, yes, we didn't have all these horrendous policies. I'm absolutely in no way, shape, or form comparing the two. But how much better did these broken systems become? We don't really we put Band-Aids on things that require like major surgery. And I think that people are timid. I mean, all you have to do is look at the mayor of New York, the whole election of the New York, the people spoke, but boy, the power structure sure tried to suppress that. I thought that was really fascinating to see it come from all different directions, right and left. And I think that's the problem. It's usurping power here. It's like taking the power away from these people, but I don't know how you do that, obviously. And it's bolstered now with social media and influencer culture. Now when you want to shut your followers up about Jeffrey Epstein, invite a bunch of their, favorite influencers to the White House, hand them a bunch of Avery binders with nothing in them, and that'll shut a lot of people up for a while, which it did. That's the problem. This is just a big performance. Why, which starts to make sense to me now. Why conspiracists constantly talk about get your popcorn. This is just a movie. It starts to feel like a movie after a while. It's so absurd. But I don't even begin to think about how I can't even begin to think of a strategy on some sort of mass scale that's going to cure this outside of electing people who are going to actually change the way things work, doing something to help bring that wealth chasm back into a gap. right? You know, I don't know. That's the answer to that question. I don't know, but we can do
Well,
things on an individual,
it's
local
okay to
level,
not
I
know.
guess. You know,
I'm not. Yeah, I'm sort of asking these questions almost just to put them into people's minds, and then maybe eventually come up with good answers. You know what I mean? So don't feel bad that you don't. You know,
well, no,
I have put
nobody has that
I put
answer.
everyone on the spot with this question,
Yeah.
and I don't expect anyone to have a coherent
I
answer
would
on
say
the spot.
anyone
But
who's concerned about saving democracy as we know it, and actually maybe creating a real democracy as we've not actually experienced, that, you know, work on the local level is always the best place to start.
oh yeah,
So that would be the only
100%.
advice: is just get involved locally, make a difference in your own
Yeah,
community, because that also gives you a community.
yeah, yeah. I was interested in what you said also about language, how we don't have adequate language for communicating a lot of these ideas. And do you have any more thoughts on that? I mean, that's central to kind of what I'm working on with my podcast, is trying to create, like, actually create language, new terms to describe phenomenon about unreality, essentially, that we are seeing, the ways in which the conspiracy minded work together to come up with ideas, because this isn't happening quite in the same way that I've usually seen described. So I think we just need more terms, I think, specific terms for this. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, as far as my thoughts on specific terms, as our country tips further and further into authoritarianism and becomes more and more like a dictatorship, I think we need to be careful about calling everyone we don't like a Nazi, for example, right? Because you can be a lot of abhorrent things and not be a
Oh
Nazi,
yeah,
or you could be, you know. I think we should call things what they are. I think that's the problem: is we don't say lies, we say misinformation. Well, it's not misinformation when it's a deliberate lie. It's a deliberate lie.
it's disinformation when it's
It's a
a
deliberate
deliberate
lie.
lie.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, yeah,
I'm
but
much more about just say it how it is, right? Because I think that we tone things down and whitewash things to the point of meaning nothing. And that's why I was saying, when it comes to extremism and talking about extremist groups, you know, there's a real fine line, as we remember with, what was it? I forget which shooting it was. There's so many. One of the recent shootings, when we were trying to figure out whether the shooter was a groyper or not, and there was this big argument online about, you know, because there's so many of these groups share features, but they're still very different.
yeah,
And the other thing to remember, if you're not online all the time like we all are, you don't
yeah.
know 90% of this stuff,
Oh
and you've
yeah,
never
yeah.
heard of
I bridge
90% of
that.
it.
Yeah, I bridge that world. Yeah,
So
very
that
much.
which is a good thing in many ways, you know. Like, no one in my family knew who Charlie Kirk was. That was a good thing. But
Yeah,
at the same time, it's not a good thing, because mainstream media doesn't cover things accurately. Legacy media, whatever you call them these days, they don't portray stories accurately. They put spin on it for their audience, and so
yeah,
that you can't rely on media to present things in detail. For one, everyone's got a short attention span, so even, you know, what we would consider serious journalism now has a lot of clickbait to it, which, again, you're combating the influencer culture also now. And everyone, you know, we already know that in order to stay monetized and to build a platform, you have to have engagement, and you need engagement to become monetized. And, you know, so most people, I've seen so many Gen Xers now who have digital content creator as their profession in their profiles most of the time, and lots of them are people who aged out of jobs in markets that valued youth, or had been laid off from industries that were no longer relevant. And a lot of people have had nowhere to go if they want to keep the creative juices flowing. And so they become digital content creators. And how do you get engagement? Well, clickbait. You got to keep people mad. You got to keep people afraid. You've got to, you know, like, reasonable conversations or boring explanations about vocabulary or language or signaling isn't going to be clicked and shared widely. But something outrageous that makes me mad is definitely going to be retweeted, and I may not even have read the whole thing, right? So that's the question: is how when we are monetizing social media and people are making a living on social media. And this goes across the aisle, all political parties, ideologies. I see it on both sides doing this, where you go to extremes of whatever your argument is because you need that engagement without checking the facts or without really, it's asking questions stuff, kind of, and that's a huge problem because influencers are kind of like little mini, we might listen to our governors and our congressmen to a certain degree, but the influencers are one who are truly influencing our lifestyles and our daily experiences. And so there is a certain amount of responsibility that, in my opinion, that should come with that. Which is why I've hung out with Rich so long, is because I have known him to be completely authentic in his motivation and his activism, completely consistent the entire time. And that's, that we can't say that with most people. And
I
that's a
concur.
problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah. I had a question here. It's from Lori. She had typed it down in the chat. She wanted to ask how the women are doing today, Yvonne and Tammy.
Yvonne, I spoke with, I don't know when that was, a couple months ago, maybe. I don't know. I lost the whole month of December, so I'm a little bit weird. I had 2 dogs die in December, so
I'm so sorry. I did
it was
know
such
about
a
that. Sorry
weird
again.
winter.
I know so much at
So I
once.
can't remember. I guess it was November or early December I spoke with her, but I haven't spoken to her since that. But she's doing well as far as I know. The thing about the Vaughn, she had some tragedy. Well, I guess it wasn't probably a tragedy. She would say it was supposed to happen, but her husband cheated on her when she was in prison with some friend that she had some woman she had met and called a friend who she'd tried to help, who then betrayed her as soon as she went to prison. So Yvonne got divorced in prison. And so when she got out, I think she was scared about what the future looked like. But since then, my observation has been that she's got a job, so she's working. It looks like she's being social. She's continuing on her spiritual journey. And that's about it. That's where she's at. Tammy's doing the same thing too. She's still working at the same job she got a couple of years ago. She's still in the same situation economically. I will say she was able to find a therapist, though, and that was the one thing that was positive about her going to prison for January 6th, is that her parole officer ordered her to counseling. And it wasn't until she got a court order that she was able to find a therapist who could take her, because when you're on Medicaid, the wait lists are very long, sometimes months at a time. And when your housing is precarious, also, you might lose your housing right when your time is up and start all over again somewhere else. So you don't think about the lives of people, and when you start to think about it, you see it on a daily basis, like I did. You start to go, yeah, I think I might start to look for some kind of explanation for why all this crap keeps happening to me. I don't know. Life is hard.
I think Get Money has another question. Get Money, do you want to come on up?
I actually just wanted to let Rich know I did send you a direct message. That's
Okay, cool.
it.
Thank you. I'll follow up with you, Get Money. Thanks for coming up also.
Sorry about
One,
taking people's question time.
no, it's no problem at all. Thank you for your question earlier and your comment. Something that Noelle said that has I wanted to back up a point that she said regarding outrage is on our support groups that we hold every Tuesday night, which are for friends and family of those who are in MAGA. Our facilitator often talks about how she talks about the addiction of rage and how there are the neuros, and she speaks, and she's actually qualified to speak about this, about neuroscience, given her background, and how the addictive quality of outrage is such that it creates dopamine hits, and we keep coming back for more and more of it. And that's the feeling that I had, Noelle, reading the book, is that it's not that Tammy and Yvonne maybe are always outraged, but there are these constant, what I imagine might be constant dopamine hits that they have, and from the content that they see online from the influencers. And in the case of Yvonne especially, she is just so certain about everything. And I wonder if that does that track with people who are deep in conspirituality that they are just so certain of their beliefs?
Well, I guess I would flip that and say that's the same question you can ask with any faith-based belief system.
That's right. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not that much different. It's still, you have to have faith that these things are possible. You have to have faith that, your prayers might come true. It's all faith-based. If you're not asking for solid evidence, right? So I don't think it's that different. And I think it's because I, I just I don't want to offend anyone when I say that, but it really isn't. It's a faith-based belief system. Conspiracies are faith-based, or QAnon is a faith-based belief system. Conspirituality is a faith-based belief system. Because with QAnon, it really does also act like that, because you still have to have faith in this unseen entity that's going to make these things happen. As the same explanation of apocalyptic Christianity, right? Well,
Yeah.
this day is going to be the last day of the world, and then that day comes and goes, but now it's been postponed a few years or something. And I don't see them all that different. Gotta have faith.
Yes. I think the title of Dr. Mark Argentino's book actually is like QAnon is like a new religion. I forget the exact title of it, but yeah, I mean, it is. You're right. You have to have faith.
Yeah. I just started thinking about that. It's like, can I say that Yvonne is? That's the other thing I wanted to say.
I was looking for the book for the title so I could tell you as you were talking. I was like, oh crap, I have it downstairs because I was reading it. But yeah, you're right.
I mean, conspiracies. The other thing people have to remember is that this does not necessarily mean you're mentally ill or crazy or not smart or uneducated or poor. You can. There's a whole bunch. There's so many demographics that go into this that there's no real pattern for that either. And that people argue with me all the time that nope, there's got to be mental illness there. And I'm like, well, or there's a coping strategy there, right? I don't that people are not all mentally ill who believe these things.
No.
So I just want to make that real clear.
And they're not
because I've used the word crazy a couple of
stupid.
times.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it in that way.
Actually, what I wanted to comment on, someone posted in the Purple Pill down there that being a conspiracist means that you have autism. It does not. It doesn't.
No, absolutely not.
That's all the post says. I don't know if you want to hide that, Rich, or what. But and I know I noticed that you have to be part
that's going to make me have to take a couple Tylenol. But
I know that you have to be part of Rich's community in order to post in the Purple Pill. I noticed that. So I just, in case you're wondering why the comments are slow, that might be it. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to say don't believe that because it's not true. It encompasses every walk of life, every profession, every mental state, from what we would consider healthy. I don't even know what that is anymore.
Exactly. And
Right.
just to give you an example, there was a woman at January 6th who was arrested for her participation, who holds a medical degree and a law degree, and one of them is from Yale and one of them is from Stanford. So these aren't stupid people.
You look at one of the biggest QAnon influencers on X is a lawyer. His name is Sun Tzu. And you would think that with all the blatant unconstitutionality that you would have to believe in to, follow that a lawyer would be the last person that would fall into it. But there's quite a few. Nurses are everywhere. There's a lot of nurses. And I think that probably the only commonality these people, the biggest commonality they have, and in some cases it may play to their mental state, but not all, is grievance.
Yeah, well, that's why the rage bait. That's why rage bait is clickbait, right? Because people are angry. People are angry, and it's easy to make them angry.
And the need to be the hero, right? Because there's the whole everything I do, everything I bake, everything I decode, everything I notice, everyone I wake up, everyone, I'm a hero. I'm helping, and especially for the women that look like us, the Gen X white empty nests. What the hell do I do with my life? women. Not that we're all in that situation or think that, but there's a lot that do, because what do you do now? For those women, they need a cause. They need something to baby. They need something to mother. They need something to take care of. They need something to, or they need something outside of that, because that's what they've done their whole lives. And they would love to put on their cape and be the hero for a change. They would love to be that, that person that they didn't get a chance to be when they were younger, whatever. That's, and it's grievance, it's community, and it's faith. And it's those three things that, and faith, I think, is probably the biggest thing, because it pushes people past their normal boundaries.
Yeah, but so does community identification, and so does identity, right?
Well,
Because
yeah, the mob
again,
mentality. Yeah,
yeah,
because they're reinforcing each other in these beliefs or these actions or these words. And in some cases, competing with each other, which is why some of the things escalate or become more severe, or, go from tiptoeing around the edges of, say, anti-Semitism to straight up white nationalism, because eventually, in order to pop up above the pack and, be the leader, you have to go more extreme.
yeah, that sounds about right. Although, like I said, most of the people I'm following didn't really want to be the leader; they just want to be visible.
Well, because it is, and it's like a Hydra, right? Or it's like a Borg, you know, where they are they all want to have a voice, I guess, as part of the greater group.
Yeah, and I think with right-wing movements, especially, it's the patriarchal structure is so much more rigid. It is on our side too, on the left, but I think women, although they've always are able to work behind the scenes with auxiliary organizing, phone trees used to be a thing, but this movement online allows women a lot more visible participation, especially with things like Moms for Liberty popping up in January of 2021, and giving women another reason to express their rage, and that again, there are very few opportunities to step out of being feminine when you're in some of these spaces, and that gives you an opportunity to be as aggressive as men. And that was one thing I witnessed with a lot of the women, were absolutely, verbally at least, as aggressive as some of the men towards like law enforcement on January 6th. Not Tammy and Yvonne, by the way. I don't think either of them said anything particularly aggressive to law enforcement, but I saw some of these women who were every bit as aggressive as men. And again, many of them had been brought to the Capitol that day with Save the Children in mind. And there was another rally going on that day that wasn't just Stop the Steal rally with Trump. There was a smaller rally going on the lower East Senate Park, where it was an anti-vax rally, where Del Bigtree had been there, and they had been talking about hanging Fauci at that one, not Pence. And so everyone from that rally then went over to the Capitol also. So you had some people there who hadn't even gone to the Stop the Steal rally. And that's another example of how these things coalesce and group together to create what we saw on January 6th.
Thank you, Noelle. Rich?
Everyone, if we don't have any additional questions or comments, this has been a really fascinating conversation. And again, I want to thank my friend, researcher, and author, Noelle Cook. Her book is The Conspiracies. We've got a link in our messages here on this post for her book. Noelle, let everyone know where they can find you, reach you, and read more of your work as well.
Oh, I'm on Blue Sky most of the time, or X, but that's where you can find me, and a website, noellecook.com. As far as next, we'll see. We'll see what's next. I'm not sure. Something with Gen X.
Thank
I'm
you so
still
much,
trying to answer
Noelle.
that. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you
She's
both.
writing a
I
book
Aren't we
really
about
all?
us
appreciate
right now. She's writing a book about us right now.
it. Exactly. I'm observing you as we speak.
She's observing the observers, guys.
But thank you, Rich. I really appreciate it. And Shelby, thank you. And thank you for everyone who joined to listen to me talk about this. I think a lot of you have already heard this ad nauseum, but I appreciate you being here anyway. Thank you.